The United States Supreme Court battle begins in Washington. Judge Amy Coney Barrett appears before the Senate Judiciary Committee to formally introduce herself to the American people. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. It's only day one, but Senate Democrats were united in condemning the confirmation hearing, now underway for Supreme Court nominee Judge Amy Coney Barrett. Democrats believe the decision should be left to the American people in the November 3rd presidential election and argued her confirmation would threaten the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. Well, CGTN's White House correspondent Nathan King joins us now. Nathan, healthcare front and center, and as expected, the opening statements in the committee part of the proceedings followed party lines, with Democrats putting healthcare front and center. What did we learn about Judge Barrett?
Well, with Amy Coney Barrett, she's following the precedent set by all other Supreme Court nominees. There's a secret to this, which essentially is say as much as possible without saying anything at all. And she very much stuck to the script. But the thing is, she didn't really have to talk that much because, as you said, Democrats and Republicans essentially in their opening statements projecting their own politics. And this is very close to the election. As you can imagine, the Democrats saying that the Republicans are hypocrites for delaying Barack Obama's nominee for over a year and not allowing him a hearing or a vote, and then just so close to the election, letting through this judge for consideration. As far as the judge herself, she's known to be conservative. She actually worked for Antonin Scalia, a former judge on the Supreme Court, and she said she would very much follow his model. But tell me if you understand what she says. Let's take a listen.
It was the content of Justice Scalia's reasoning that shaped me. His judicial philosophy was straightforward. A judge must apply the law as it is written, not as she wishes it were. Sometimes that approach meant reaching results that he did not like. But as he put it in one of his best-known opinions, that is what it means to say that we have a government of laws and not of men.
So basically what she's saying is the US Constitution should be adhered to as you read it. A textualist or an actualist, and this is a way conservatives like to think that that's the way the Constitution should be interpreted, rather than a living document, if you like, that changes over time as society does. But the big thing for the Democrats was that they know she has written before about disagreeing with Supreme Court decisions that have upheld Obamacare or health care. Just in the middle of a pandemic, they think they can win. They stayed away from talk about abortion. They know that is divisive in America, especially a few weeks before an election. But you can see both sides mapping out not just this nomination, but also the election, which is obviously just a few weeks away.
Right, Nathan, and let's talk about that election. The US President Donald Trump is in Sanford, Florida at this hour. That's his first campaign rally following his COVID-19 diagnosis. So how critical is it for Trump to be back campaigning and back in Florida?
Well, for him, it is critical. He loves a crowd. And by the way, Sanford, for people who want to know exactly where it is, it's Orlando, basically. Disneyland, a huge area of votes, and it does swing lots of different ways, Republican and Florida. And for him, it's critical. Look, we've seen the polls. Is he behind 12 points nationally, 16 points nationally? But it's about the swing states. And Florida will essentially, if he doesn't win Florida, he doesn't get the presidency. And it's essentially neck and neck with him and Joe Biden at the moment. So he needs it. The problem is this is the COVID election. He's just recovering from COVID. We just heard from the White House that he has tested negative twice consecutively for COVID. But he is not the typical COVID patient. He has received treatment that most Americans could only dream of. He said, don't make it dominate your life. Well, as we've seen the statistics on the last few months, and certainly in the last few days, cases are at 50,000 again per day. Deaths are inching up between 750 and 1,000 again. The US still the most hard hit, nearly 8 million cases, 215,000 nearly dead. It's a very difficult backdrop to campaign against. And I can tell you, as you can see from the rally pictures that we're just getting in, Most people aren't wearing masks. They are not social distancing. We are above the White House at the moment because we don't think it's safe enough to be there. So it's very interesting how this will play out just a few weeks before the election. But he needs to campaign because without something changing, according to the polls, he could be a one-term president.
Thanks, Nathan. That's CGTN's Nathan King reporting. Well, for more now on the Supreme Court hearing and the U.S. presidential race, let's bring in our panel. Joining us now from McLean, Virginia via Skype is John Sitilides. He's a geopolitical strategist with Trilogy Advisors. Also with us in Washington, D.C. is Hamza Khan. He's a democratic strategist and founder of the Pluralism Project. Dr. George Benjamin is the executive director of the American Public Health Association in Washington, D.C. And Todd is a professor and the director of the political management program at George Washington University. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. John, let me start with you. The Supreme Court nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, made her opening statement at the U.S. Senate Committee on Monday. This is a very contentious hearing. There was a lot of focus on the U.S. Congress on Capitol Hill on Monday morning. It's the political divisions, there are ideological divisions. Let's listen to part of what she had to say.
Courts have a vital responsibility to the rule of law, which is critical to a free society. But courts are not designed to solve every problem or right every wrong in our public life. The policy decisions and value judgments of government must be made by the political branches, elected by and accountable to the people. The public should not expect courts to do so, and courts should not try.
So, John, this was an opening statement. Amy Coney Barrett there also introducing her family at the hearing this morning. But there was something that she said there in that excerpt we just played which caught my attention. She said, courts are not here to solve every problem or right every wrong. Isn't that what appeal courts do?
To me, it seems that she was self-evidently quite accurate in her understanding of the role of the judiciary in the American Republic, Anand. And that is to ensure that any laws that are passed by the Congress and implemented by the executive branch are constitutional. That's it. They're not involved in policy. And correctly, I think she stated that the people have their say in policy and in legislation through their elected officials, and we have a Supreme Court that is separate, right? We have three branches of government in the United States to ensure that, A, legislation is constitutional, and if it's not, they can overturn it, and then you go back to the legislative branch, and they can fix it. So whether it's something as contentious as the abortion issue in Roe v. Wade, now we saw that there was a major to-do over the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. First of all, it's very unlikely that either of those two or any of the major contentious decisions will be overturned if she's successfully appointed to the Supreme Court, or approved, I should say. But even if that were the case and those were overturned, then the issues simply go back to the Congress and to the executive branch. And that's how we achieve legislative solutions to problems in the country, not by judges handing down decisions by fiat because of their own personal preferences.
Hamza Khan, what is your view on this? This is being seen through an ideological lens. Republicans and many people in the country believe that Judge Barrett could be the key vote needed to overturn the Affordable Care Act, which is, as John pointed out, also known as Obamacare. A vote could send it to the rubbish heap. So how pivotal do you think her role will be?
Well, I think it's important for us to first recognize that, as your previous guest pointed out, we've had a long battle in this country about judicial activism versus the idea of textualism, or reading the law as it is. And traditionally, throughout the history of our country, both forces have played an important role in the evolving understanding of how law is written and understood. So that being said, I think it's an important point for us to realize that there's no clear-cut answer towards, do we read the law as it's written, or do we try to read into it the spirit of the law, which was meant to exist alongside it? That being said, when it comes to the possibility of Judge Barrett ending up on the Supreme Court, there is also something to think about when it comes to our allies across the world and how they've structured their constitutional courts. The United States has a very small Supreme Court in comparison to most of our allies. Japan, as I recall, has 15 justices. France has several different courts of last resort, I think the smallest of which has 12 justices. And then Germany also has more justices than we do. And in comparison to each one of these countries, we have 330 million people in the United States, and our Supreme Court receives petition for review for 7,000 different cases, and only hears between 100 and 150 of them every single year. What that means is that it is long overdue for us to reform the Supreme Court and expand its membership so that we have a far more judiciously representative body in front of the public than not when it comes to handling these important issues of law.
All right, let me go to Todd Belton. Todd, what Hamza is talking about there is known as packing the court. What is packing the court, especially for our viewers who are watching from outside the United States?
Well, packing the court is ostensibly changing the number of justices on the court so that you get more of a politically desirable result. Now, we've had a couple of instances in the nation's history when this has been done. The most famous was FDR's court packing scheme, which actually didn't come to fruition. It died in the Senate. But the idea would be that, you would put more justices on there. FDR's idea was that he was going to put an additional one for everyone who was 70 years and 6 months old to help them out. But that didn't make it. And shortly thereafter, the court actually sort of changed their tune. We do know that the court sometimes does act in accordance with public opinion and does sort of follow it along in a little bit, and that is actually what happened there. But it's up to the Congress to determine through an act of Congress, simple majority in both the House and Senate, to change the number of justices on the Supreme Court.
Do you expect that could happen if the Democrats have both houses?
It's going to be difficult because they would have to get rid of the filibuster. Because this is an act of Congress and the filibuster still exists for pieces of legislation, that would mean they would need 60 votes in the Senate, which they just don't have right now. And even under the best outcomes in the forthcoming election, it's really difficult to see that they might.
Hamza, there's just one other point I want to get to about Judge Barrett's nomination, and that's the course of this nomination and the process through which it went through. There's been a lot of controversy over that. Republicans have been criticized for what has been ramming this through. That privilege, that right was not afforded to President Obama when he tried to nominate a justice to the Supreme Court. But do Democrats have any option at this stage of delaying this vote?
They do have the option of delaying the vote by causing as much turmoil as they can throughout the hearings, and that might be a strategy that they try to exploit over the coming week. That being said, it will be very hard for Democrats in the end to prevent this justice from taking their seat if they are so nominated and appointed by the Senate. What is more likely to happen, though, even though the filibuster does exist for certain legislation at this time, is that the filibuster will be removed in the coming years, and the Supreme Court will likely have to expand. It simply is not an acceptable outcome either for policy or for justice, the quality of justice in the United States, for us to have a small court of 9 justices.
All right, let me, at this stage, bring in Dr. George Benjamin. Let's talk about COVID-19, Dr. Benjamin, and the president. President Trump says he's now immune to the virus, and he's singing the praises of the drugs that he received while he was at Walter Reed Hospital. He mistakenly also called those drugs a vaccine. What is your assessment of the president's health?
Well, we're certainly glad that he's doing better. It's not really clear what his status is. We don't, we've been told that he is now, negative from his test, but no one knows whether he's immune. The science just isn't there to know for sure whether or not he's, he's disease-free completely. But it remains to be seen. One of the challenges with this disease is that for a while you look like you're doing okay, and then suddenly your immune response reacts against your body and you get much sicker. So we hope that does not happen, but he's not necessarily free yet, and so I hope that he takes care of himself.
And Dr. Benjamin, President Trump held a rally over the weekend on Saturday. We saw lots of supporters there attending that rally, many of them without masks, and in fact our reporter just told us a moment ago that there's a rally currently underway in Florida, and there are lots of people there without masks. How risky is this?
Those are extraordinarily risky, and I would encourage no one to go to those kind of rallies. Certainly not without wearing a mask and keeping physically distant from one another. I watched that rally on TV as well, and Hopefully, there was no one in that crowd that had COVID-19, but if there was, then we will see disease from that rally.
John, of course, there's lots of other developments here in Washington. We know that millions of Americans have filed for unemployment benefits. Many have lost their jobs. They've been furloughed. More than 800,000 people filed for unemployment benefits last week. There is a stimulus bill which is in the works. It seems to be bogged down right now by politics in Congress. What's the outlook?
Well, first of all, Anand, going back to the first question that you asked, that's exactly how it's supposed to play out in the United States and in a functioning democracy. Politics will be involved in achieving any type of an outcome when it comes to a legislative debate. Again, not for the judiciary, but here between the executive branch and the legislative branches. But you do have a very serious debate because on the one hand, the president, who's facing a very serious challenge, I think it's debatable as to what the actual lead that Joe Biden may have over President Trump in the battleground states actually is. We'll know in 3 weeks or so. But he is facing a major challenge. He's probably behind. And I think you're going to see both candidates hitting the major battleground states very intensively over the next 3 weeks. And President Trump would love nothing more than a major feather in the cap and offering another form of stimulus to, again, the hundreds of thousands of unemployed, as you correctly mentioned, perhaps a boost in their weekly unemployment checks, other forms of stimulus to help out the airline industry, the restaurant industry, bus and rail, and try to give people a sense that the worst is behind us, we've turned the corner. And in some ways, Anand, I think it's debatable as to what extent this stimulus is going to be necessary at the levels that Speaker Pelosi has been pushing for, sort of the $2 to $3 trillion, because there was a poll that was just released that shows that 56% of Americans feel financially optimistic about the future, that they're better off today than they were 4 years ago. That's an astonishing figure. Very, very positive for President Trump. I don't know if that message will get out. And I will add one more thing, Anand. Sometime around October 29th, the federal government will announce the annualized GDP growth rate for the United States economy in the third quarter. And right now, it's expected to be at a historic record of between 30 to 35% annualized growth in the third quarter. And that'll be the week before the election day. So to whatever extent there are those persuadables, those undecideds who are still waiting to make up their minds, that could move them in Trump's direction in a way that almost no other datum could.
What do you make of that, Hamza? John just cited that poll. 56 million people, 56 million Americans think that they're in a better place now. And John also pointed out that GDP figures, which are widely expected to be positive, will be published pretty soon.
I would point out that according to Real Clear Politics, in more than a few of the battleground states, averaging the past few polls of the last 7 to 8 weeks, Biden is ahead in almost every single state. And I think that's something really to keep in mind here. The economy can grow GDP-wise as much as it wants to, but everyday Americans don't feel pretty fantastic about 214,000 of us being dead from COVID-19 and millions of Americans being infected simply because the White House could not engage in a national security policy that would have avoided such a fate. At the end of the day, Americans want a government that functions, not just a government that has talking points for Wall Street. And unfortunately, your other guest seems to have ignored that important point for voters every single day.
Just one other thing, Hamza, and there's been some talk of a piecemeal stimulus bill, just a part of it to help the airlines out. What are the Democrats thinking about?
Democrats are of a divided opinion when it comes to piecemeal legislation for a simple reason that we are in an election year, and we're not really sure whether or not that would achieve the ends that are desired, which is to serve the American people. Please keep in mind that I think it was $1.6 trillion was proposed by the White House recently and was rejected by both parties in Congress. We need to have something that is far more all-encompassing in terms of an omnibus bill that would go after the real threat to America, which is that Main Street is on the verge of collapse, again, because of the boneheaded policies of Donald Trump in the White House.
Todd Belt, we know that the pandemic has hit the economy very badly. The unemployment rate shot up. There are businesses that have closed, and we know that many of those businesses will never reopen again. John Sitilides did give us that figure of many Americans, millions of Americans who think that they are in a better place right now. I'm guessing that those are Americans who still have their jobs, but how big an issue is this whole question of the economy going to be in the election?
Well, right now, the main issue is COVID, and it has stayed at front and center. Certainly the president's going to try to change that, but even before the conventions and before the debates, and certainly because the president was struck with COVID, that's a big issue, and people really trust Joe Biden more on handling COVID than they trust the president. Now, elections are not just about the past, looking retrospectively backwards. That is important, but also it's important to look forward to think about who you will be better under in the future, because elections are about the future. If we look back at the 2000 election and we look at Bush versus Gore, which we might be talking about a little bit more in a few weeks here, people were doing very well under the Clinton administration, but George Bush was promising tax cuts and promising something different. So it really depends on who you might think you'll do better under in the future, not just looking at the past.
Dr. Benjamin, the country's leading infectious diseases expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, he said that the death toll from COVID could be as high as 300,000 to 400,000 people in the United States. Joe Biden, the challenger to Donald Trump, has been talking about this. Let's listen to what Joe Biden had to say.
215,000 dead because of COVID. Experts say we're likely to lose another 200,000 people in the next few months unless we take some serious action, and he doesn't know what he's doing. All because this president's only worried about one thing: the stock market.
So, Dr. Benjamin, those figures there that were cited by Dr. Anthony Fauci, and we heard there from Joe Biden saying that 215,000 people have died so far, very alarming. But what do you think can be done right now to stave this off?
You know, the solution for this is pretty clear. Wear a mask, stay away from one another, and wash your hands. This is not rocket science. We know how to control this outbreak. Every other nation in the world has been able to do it. We're the outlier.
John, the second presidential debate has been cancelled. Joe Biden will take part in an ABC town hall. There is talk that President Trump may have another town hall with the NBC network. They are in negotiations about that. But we were told earlier on that should there be a debate, it would have been virtual. Is the president shooting himself in the foot here by withdrawing from the debate? Because isn't he the one that needs the debate? He's the one that's trailing in the polls.
I think there's two ways of looking at the president's decision, Anand. On the one hand, it may be a tactical error to seem like you're backing down from a debate, especially because, at least in the major media, most were quite critical of President Trump's performance in the first debate. I mean, essentially, he was debating both the candidate and the moderator. But I think he's to blame also for failing to take the opportunity to explain to the American people the policy decisions that he feels were very, very advantageous to the American public. And he could have done so at that debate, and he said he got caught in a lot of the bickering inside the studio. But on the other hand, I think it's important to note President Trump's personality. He is looking to project strength to the American people and to world leaders, and especially those of our adversarial countries, the great power competitors. And I think for him, quote unquote, alpha male candidate, to be on a computer screen in a virtual format and allow a moderator who now has been attacked by the White House as being partial to Joe Biden, to have the potential to turn off his microphone would emit such a projection, an image of weakness before the American people and a global audience that the president said it's simply not worth the risk.
Hamza, what do you make of that?
I have to agree, this is a weak president on every count. And so him looking weak in front of the American public because his mic is turned off, because he doesn't have the self-control to be quiet, I think that's a perfect image that should go along with Donald J. Trump for the rest of history. That being said, there was one thought I wanted to offer from earlier when we were talking about the economy. An economy that's booming is wonderful if you're alive to enjoy it. And unfortunately, the way things are going in this country, quite a few Americans are likely to die from COVID-19 because Donald J. Trump doesn't know how to actually do his job, which is to be commander-in-chief and protect our borders and protect everyday Americans.
Todd Belt, you know, in the run-up to the election, and as we've just heard, just 3 weeks to go to the election, there's been all kinds of speculation in the United States on whether the loser in this election will accept the outcome of the election. President Trump has not answered that. Hillary Clinton at one point told Joe Biden not to concede. What are the chances of this election descending into some kind of chaos, which would take weeks, if not months, to resolve?
Right, that's the big threat of what we call the red mirage, where it looks like on election night, perhaps Donald Trump has won, but in reality, if you count the ballots later on, Joe Biden wins. But during that time, there are court cases brought and a lot of other things go on which cause people to question the authenticity of the mail-in votes. But if we look at what's happening in Georgia today, where the early voting started, people are waiting in lines 5 hours plus to vote early. The Democrats have really been making a strong effort to get their voters out, to get them to vote early, to vote by, if they're going to be using an absentee, to drop it off at drop boxes, and to make sure that they get those ballots in on time and actually in early, so that in the states where they can be counted before Election Day or on Election Day, they can be doing that so that it doesn't bleed over into a questionable area in days afterwards. But if we look at what's going on in Georgia, which is supposed to be a swing state, and we've actually got that in our GW Peoria poll as being one of the toss-ups right now, it doesn't look very good for President Trump.
Dr. Benjamin, one final question on the pandemic. Do you see any respite from its spread, or could we be seeing another wave? As we just heard, 215,000 people have already lost their lives. And just on Friday last week, there was something like 57,000 new infections in the United States.
Yeah, we should expect this outbreak to get worse before it gets better. We don't have a plan. We've not really responded effectively as a nation, and we don't have the effective national leadership that we need. So it's going to get worse before it gets better. And when you add to the fact that we're going to have the flu season on top of that and we're reopening, it's going to be a problem.
Just on that point that you just mentioned, that we're going to have the flu season, we're going to have the cold season. So we're going to have lots of people who are going to have the sniffles, who are going to have clogged up noses and throats, etc., who are going to be very confused as well.
That's right. We're going to have to differentiate between those two diseases. Whether it's influenza, whether or not it's going to be COVID. So that's going to be a lot of testing, and a lot of people are going to be concerned about what they have. And we really are still having challenges with having enough access to testing. We still have problems with not enough personal protective equipment. So we're not really ahead of this outbreak. We're still chasing it.
All right, and that's where we have to leave it this evening. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks to all of our guests for being with us, and thanks to you for watching.